Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last thematic day for COP28. Um, Today, one of the themes is water, and so we are focusing on that topic today and discussing some of the issues related to water as it pertains to its intersection and priorities with climate change. And so, as you'll note, the title is The Nexus of Climate Change and Water Security. And this is a panel organized by the Middle East Institute, featuring the Middle East Institute, scholars from the Institute, but kindly hosted by the Al-Attiyah Foundation. And so we're very happy to be here to, on the final day of this pavilion, to talk about these critical water issues as it pertains to climate change and climate priorities. Before we dive into our panel discussion, I'd like to go through a round of introductions of our panelists. And I thought something a little bit different today and maybe have you all introduce yourselves on what you think is most relevant for our audience to know. And then after we do that, we'll dive into the discussion questions. So maybe Raha will start with you.
Sure. I'm Raha Kindavar. I'm Senior Advisor to the Dean of Georgetown University in Qatar and the Dean of Georgetown University. Georgetown University's new environment school called the Earth Commons Institute. And I'm a hydrologist by background, so I've worked as a scientist for many years in the multilateral sectors at UNEP and the World Bank, in the U.S. government, at NASA and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and a short stint in the private sector. So I guess today I'll bring with me kind of the range of perspectives in addition to the science perspective.
Thanks, Mohammed. I'm Yusuf Webby. I'm with the UAE National Center of Meteorology, specifically with their Rainfall Enhancement Program. I'm one of the advisors for their basically Strategic Directions Committee, which helps both operations and R&D in this field. I'm also the Chief Science Officer with Weather Modification International, a US-based company that specializes in both operations and research in this field as well. So happy to talk about more the unconventional strands of the water, energy, food nexus.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm Megan Ferrando. I am a grant manager with a humanitarian NGO focusing on Syria. So based in Jordan, focusing on Syria. And a lot of the projects that we're doing are focused on water scarcity. And before that, I was with several other NGOs, every time focusing on the environmental aspects of development cooperation and humanitarian aid. And so I think as a contribution, let's say it will be from my side more on the social element, the social inequalities side of water scarcity.
Great, excellent. Thank you all. I guess I should also probably introduce myself. I'm Ahmed Mahmoud. I'm the director of the Climate and Water Program at the Middle East Institute. So let's dive right in, and I want to start with maybe a sort of a broader question, and then we'll kind of dive into deep in different parts of the water security aspect. And so Raha, I'll pose this question to you first, but others are certainly more than welcome to take a try at it. And the question is, how does climate change impact water security on a global or broad scale? And what do you think are some of the key vulnerabilities associated with this nexus of climate and water?
Okay, well, the reason why we're all here, and especially today. So globally, of course, it ranges. So depending on the part of the world that we're in, but summarizing things, we're going to have more extremes. The extremes will become more extreme. And I don't like this terminology, but I have heard it used before. There will be winners and losers in this process. So in terms of, water resources, meaning that we're going to have in some places a significant reductions in water resources writ large. And in other places, we're going to have more water. So more water in places, less in others, more erratic rainfall and things in certain places, and just extremes in general. But I might actually just bring it, since we are the Middle East Institute, I'd like to bring it from the global, which is really, I would say, the IPCC reports and a lot of other resources have done a very good job of summarizing the global impacts, but bringing it down to the region. In the MENA region, there's, of course, a lot of diversity. So we have anywhere from, hot desert climates to humid continental climates and even subtropical in parts of the region. So there is quite a lot of diversity, but generally speaking, there will be a water scarcity issue for many places. So of the 17 countries in the MENA region, 11 of them will face a severe water scarcity in the near future. And I think 15 of those, so almost all of them, will face water scarcity. So there's slightly different definitions, but that gives us a lot of challenges, not just in terms of water, but all the things that touch water resources as well. So the food, energy, water nexus. A big one is agriculture and food security. So food security is water security is food security, and especially in the region, given the geopolitical complexities and the heavy reliance on food imports, the water scarcity challenges in the future will be really something of concern, not just in terms of agricultural or food security within countries, but also in terms of geopolitical challenges that we may face across the region and between the region and with other places. And then in terms of water resources, a couple of things to highlight are actually just water in general. So one is that, again, on the agricultural side, right, in many of the countries, especially in the Gulf, there is in some places almost actually no surface water, and in other places very limited surface water resources. So there's a reliance on either desalination or on groundwater extraction. And in places like Qatar, where I'm currently based, this extraction of groundwater resources, especially for the agricultural sector, is being extracted at 4 to 5 times the rate that the groundwater is being replenished. So that really means it's more of a non-renewable water resource in this case. So I think going into the future, we're really going to need to think about the other sources of water that we may have. I think Yusuf may have some perspective on that. But also, non-conventional water resources may become more conventional, like wastewater reuse may become more of the norm across the region. I know it is in some places right now. But the other thing I wanted to highlight is flooding. And one of the big challenges that we're facing in the region is that you have the unpredictable, or in some cases very erratic rainfall patterns that we're seeing across the region. And when we look at the climate models for the MENA region, that's actually the area where we have a lot of uncertainty, is that precipitation prediction. So what we're seeing is actually a similar pattern that we, generally speaking, that we're seeing in other places, which is you have more water coming down in shorter periods of time. And unfortunately, our urban centers in the region were just not built to manage that sort of rainfall. So it's leading to a lot of challenges that we haven't seen before, like the urban flooding, really in some cases completely shutting down the city. So I may just add one last thing, and that's and then I'll stop there, is the coastal resilience. That's another challenge, and in terms of ecosystem and biodiversity health, kind of touching at that as well. So our coasts are obviously very important centers, not just for marine life, but also for financial reasons, right? Our ports. So that's any changes that we're going to see to our coasts will be very important from an economic and ecosystem and biodiversity perspective.
I'm glad you touched on that note, because I want to pick up on the economic side. You kind of gave me a breadcrumb there. So I'll shift to Megan on that question to pull on that thread, which is, what are some of the social and economic implications of climate-induced water scarcity? Because that's certainly one of the realities. And how can equitable solutions be developed across countries that have different, maybe socioeconomic conditions and issues to address these types of water scarcity challenges?
Yes, thank you. Well, it's it's a very good transition because Raha, when you were talking about this, I completely agree that there are the different countries in the Middle East and globally also are going to hit in different ways because of their natural makeup. Some more water, less water, etc. With all the details that you were explaining, there is an overlay also with their with each country's ability to prepare and prepare for these events. So you can have a country that will experience very severe water scarcity or groundwater depletion, but will have the financial economic means and also the political backing and willingness and priority to invest into preventing these types of scenarios, and also in responding, having the means to respond whenever this happens. So I think there, if we look at the Middle East specifically, they're very different contexts in terms of preparation and adaptation for this reality in the coming decades. I'd say in terms of socioeconomic implications of really climate-induced yeah, I'm thinking of migration right away. Climate-induced water scarcity. There's a lot, but especially in the Middle East, it's quite difficult to know what is exactly climate-induced and what is part of the broader socioeconomic consequences. I'd say that both are always very difficult to see as separate. I think, Raha, you touched upon food security, a very important one, because with the obvious consequences of the impact on production, which has an impact on food security within the country, but also if you look at countries that are highly dependent on agriculture for their workforce, it will have an impact on people's livelihoods. People's livelihoods we see everywhere. If those opportunities are decreasing, people will be moving to cities more and more. More and more cities will not necessarily be ready to be able to take up so many new people, which is also what you were saying of the urban centers, which will be even more vulnerable. So there's this entire part of starting from example, from a food security perspective, but going into the broader socioeconomic implications. I'm thinking also in general terms of public services. If you look at water, for example, used for electricity production, and the impact that has with the lowering of water levels in rivers, at dams, etc., and the malfunctioning then of hydroelectric dams. I mean, so I'm working on Syria. There's the main dam there, Tapka Dam, which is now for 2-3 years in a row has been reaching its dead level, which means that also this has had an impact on the electricity production for 3 million people there in the wider region. This has an impact on the public health services, etc. But also, in order to mitigate that risk, the local authorities have also been taking away some of the water for farmers to make sure that they can actually at least have a minimum level of electricity production. So it has also had an impact on the farmers, on food security, on the wider livelihoods in the area. So in that sense, the climate-induced water scarcity, even if it's never only climate-induced, has this branches out throughout the socioeconomic consequences for society.
I'm going to hang with you for this next question because I want to pivot a little bit to a similar but different scenario where, we talked about socioeconomic conditions that are maybe unique to each country, but in the context of relationship between countries. So what I mean by that is the potential for conflict or geopolitical implications arising from competition of water resources in areas or regions that are experiencing heightened climate-related challenges. Can you comment on what are some of those potential conflicts and geopolitical implications across countries?
Yes. Again, very difficult to talk about a region in particular,
Yeah.
or talk about globally, because if you'd really want to understand, you need to go down to a smaller level.
Mhm.
I think one thing to make clear is, for now, until now in history, no two countries have gone to war over water, as of yet. So don't know about the future, but as of yet, no two countries have gone to war purely over water. However, water increasingly plays a part within existing conflicts, be it at the national level, at the regional level, or at the subnational level. So it plays a part, but not as an individual factor. It can play a part, especially at the subnational level, in aggravating existing tensions between people. You can see, for example, if there's a drought, people are moving to another place. This can cause extra pressure on public services there, on the economic situation there, and that can increase tensions between particular groups. There's also the water scarcity can increase the tensions between a particular group and the government. But between governments, as of yet, it is not a sole cause of conflict. You can also say that water scarcity can be a victim then of existing conflict, because it can be used as a tool of war. Withholding water can be used as leverage, can be used as control, can be used as pressure. But in that sense, it's more of a consequence of existing conflict, and then playing into it and increasingly playing into it, because the more water becomes more water can become scarce in a particular context, the more tempting it is to be used as leverage or as control mechanism. So you can say that with climate change, with the increase in water scarcity, it can be increasingly used as increasingly weaponized as a factor within existing tensions and conflicts.
Well said. Yusuf, you've been very patient, but question coming to you. Maybe you won't be. You'd want me to be have you more patient, because it may not be an easy question. But my question to you is on. Now we're shifting. I'd like to shift the conversation towards solutions. We've sort of talked about issues, challenges, what's facing us in terms of this particular nexus between climate and water. So as we're shifting, hopefully now, to talk about maybe more positive or a sort of better outlook of dealing with those issues. My question to you is, in what ways, if we think about water in terms of the approach of an integrated water resources management approach, which I think, based on what we've heard so far, that has to happen. With that in mind, what can an integrated water resources management approach contribute to both climate adaptation and climate mitigation?
Yeah, I think Raha and Megan covered two very important points. So Raha talked about flooding. Megan gave a great example on Syria in terms of the dams and what they're looking at to basically adapt to what changing climate is. So the key word that really comes to my mind when we talk about integrated water management approaches is infrastructure. So we first need to understand or acknowledge that a big part of our infrastructure is basically very primitively built, focused exclusively on transmission. Whereas in an ideal world, you want it to be more cyclical. So rather than just focus on transmission, you'd focus more on water storage, water reuse. So capturing those feedbacks, essentially. And to build on what Raha and Megan mentioned on dams and flooding, when we look at dams and other water storage systems here, for example, managed aquifer recharge, other engineering solutions, you're essentially ticking multiple boxes at a time. On one hand, you're basically having a more agile infrastructure that's able to handle these extreme events when you properly design them, when we get the proper engineering support, both also the R&D people involved. you'd basically be able to capture these extreme events in a better sort of integrated approach. You'd also have that sort of transmission incorporated with your water storage, water reuse. So you'd be able to supply that additional water at times where you'd have that drought season, et cetera. And even going a step further, so getting Megan gave the example of basically the hydropower. So if you get your renewable energy sector involved, you would ideally place these dams in locations where you have potential for hydropower. So you're essentially getting closer into a segue of having integrated water management resources feeding into your whole trilogy of water, food, energy nexus. So that's really the ideal world. Now, real world applications are obviously much more difficult, but having these things in mind when we do the initial design of these systems is very critical. The other thing I wanted to touch on is when we talk about integrated water management approaches, we need to look at unconventional water resources, which Raha, and I fully agree with her, are becoming more conventional for the region here, specifically when we talk about desalination. I mean, we've seen figures for up to 70 or 80% of potable water being provided exclusively by desal. So really, you need to start diversifying, and the Gulf region, GCC region, are really pioneering in this realm. So we're looking at atmospheric water generation, for example. How scalable that is of course a question for future R&D and sort of prototyping, building up across that technology readiness level. We're also looking at rainfall enhancement approaches. So we've seen operational programs across the world, but really looking at the fundamental research, how to make it better, how to get more interdisciplinary. So how can we make the seeding material more effective? How can we increase targeting, understanding of cloud microphysical processes? Fog harvesting, that's another thing. So are we ready to really integrate these additional sort of streams of water into our fully already deployed integrated water management approaches? So we need to have these sort of loopholes in the system that we can feed in these connections to understand more how we can better utilize them.
Thank you. Another area that could be explored or further explored in terms of the solution space to this issue in Nexus is looking at things like nature-based solutions. So Raha, I'll pose this to you in terms of what role can nature-based solutions, such as reforestation, sustainable land management, et cetera, I'm sure you'll touch on those and more, play in enhancing water security and attempts to mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Nature-based solutions are amazing, and they're really such an important tool for every place in the world as we move forward in ensuring that we have climate resilience, urban centers, climate resilient, all the things that touch climate resilient food systems, climate resilient water systems, and they are really an integral part of our future. So I'm happy, first of all, that there's been a lot of discussion around this at this COP, and I hope that we have more of it moving forward. Okay, so in terms of the different types of nature-based solutions, right? So that can include things like freshwater ecosystems, which would be wetlands, mangroves in a lot of cases, especially in kind of regions, coastal regions, the protection of watersheds, reforestation, ecological restoration as well. And for let's take one example in terms of wetlands. That's a really important area for us. Actually, it's in terms of both protecting and water resources, in protecting our communities and making us more coastally resilient, but also in mitigating carbon. So actually, the nice thing about nature-based solutions is that they provide multiple benefits. So the carbon benefits of forest, of wetlands are known, but actually there's a lot more that we need to do to really quantify and study the amounts of benefit that we get from these ecosystems. And one thing to highlight that's especially important is that when a lot of the dialogue at the kind of policy levels for nature-based solutions, like forests and wetlands has been really carbon centered. And that's great. So of course they are an important and in some cases very significant carbon sink. But we also have to consider the trade-offs when it comes to things like water and biodiversity, and water especially because that's our panel. So if you plant trees, they can mitigate carbon, but they also use water, and especially they use groundwater. So we really need to be very thoughtful about the way that we are doing, especially if it's a reforestation effort, in where we're planting and what types of things we're planting. I think that's very important and in moving forward. And then one area that I wanted to highlight too, because I was talking a lot about this yesterday, is rangelands. So 70% of the MENA region is rangeland. That was actually didn't realize it was so high. And about half of these in the region are degraded. About 25% of the arable lands, rangelands that are arable land is heavily degraded. So that's an opportunity space, right? The restoration of lands like this, in addition to the other types of ecosystem services, can have a direct and active management of these lands can have direct impact on our water resources budget. So for one thing, it can replenish our groundwater resources, which is, right, we talked about what a challenge that is. And that's because when you have degraded lands, especially rangelands, and you have degraded soils, and when you have degraded and compromised soils, less water can make it into the water table, and more of it will just run off. So that's a resource that we're essentially just losing. And so we can be really, again, also thoughtful and strategic about how we manage these lands, restore these lands, so that we're getting the most benefit in terms of water, and also carbon and other things like biodiversity. And just one thing to highlight around that is that the importance of data and technology. It's not everything, that the really doing the work on the ground and ensuring the policies are in line with the management practices and what's actually being implemented are very important. But also the tracking and monitoring, in terms of where we're implementing these projects, why we're implementing these projects, and then collecting data afterward to see how effective have they been. Just because you plant a bunch of trees somewhere, it doesn't mean that they're actually going to make it, right? So really, and the same with wetlands or mangroves, we really need to measure the effectiveness of these different interventions over time. And that's, ecosystems take time to respond. So that means that a monitoring campaign that's, at least 7 years into the future. There are many tools that we have in helping us to do this. One of them is satellite remote sensing, but lots of other ways that we can do it. But I do want to just underline the importance of being transparent and accountable when we implement nature-based solutions projects.
Thank you, Raha. So my last formal question is to you, Yusuf, and it picks up on some of the things you said on the integrated water management question we had earlier. And this is now looking at technology and innovation as part of the solution space. And so how can advancements in technology and innovation, how can they be leveraged to improve water management practices, particularly in the face of changing climate conditions?
Yeah, and I'm really happy to hear what Raha had to say about she's giving me a real great sort of segue into what I wanted to give on basically another real world application. So one application to build on that question is basically precision agriculture or smart irrigation. So that's where, of course, we've seen a huge, I would say, transformational research on in both applications using satellite remote sensing. So we've seen an upscale in tech development, not only with the private space sector, increased launching, different sizes, payloads with new sensors and probes, basically going down to unforeseen temporal and spatial resolutions to monitor at crop level. And basically on the downstream, how to handle all that data volume that's coming in, you're seeing also a leap in AI, machine learning applications, basically able to process, post-process, analyze, and also interpret that data. And even further down the downstream, you're looking at Internet of Things. How can we interpret this data to basically the farmer level on their apps, on their mobile phones? Then they're able to see when actually they can integrate all that data into their decision-making process to irrigate or not. So it's a natural progression from R&D down to commercialization, if you look at it from the private sector realm. Now, one thing we need to be cautious about, and I've personally seen this in the area of weather modification and sort of the non-conventional water resource approaches from the private sector, and Raha touched a little bit on this in terms of monitoring, albeit in a different area, but it also applies here. It's MMRV, so measuring, monitoring, reporting, and verification. We really need to do that for any emerging technologies that are coming from the private sector. And one way you successfully do that in a very systematic way is, of course, talking about the trilogy we've all been talking about at COP28, academia, private sector, and government. So having those three entities involved at multiple levels, make sure you're getting that research from blue sky science, so technology readiness level 1 up to TRL, where you actually have a fully demonstrated system that's scalable, implemented on the ground. What I've seen in the private sector, unfortunately, in terms of unconventional water resources, they're really focusing on market readiness levels, so MRLs, whereas we really need to look at the whole scale. So TRLs, technology readiness levels, market readiness levels, and application readiness levels. That really helps us sort of achieve that nice balance between innovation, but also staying within regulatory frameworks and sort of demonstrating that cost benefit at a short term, but also at a long term. So that comes into what the monitoring side that Raha, I fully agree. Field campaigns need to be properly designed to sort of look at these technologies throughout their whole time scale.
That's great. That's helpful to the way you mapped it out. So we're about to conclude, but I'm going to throw one rapid fire question to all of you. Condense it, very short, one sentence, not more than that, your sort of last takeaway message on this topic that you would like our audience to walk away with. And maybe we'll start with Megan and come down the panel. I put you all on the spot. Sorry.
It's more of an open question than anything else. I think these technologies and advancements are really promising and really great, but are not applicable to all the countries in the Middle East. And so I'm wondering, for countries that cannot rely on their own funding and their own stronger governments and innovation and private sector, whether there is an opportunity for this type of progress through international climate finance.
Great.
Open question.
Great. Okay. Yusuf?
I'm building on, I guess, Megan's question. I personally see this in the UAE and the GCC as well. There is international funding, but it needs to be channeled in the right way. So we need to find the right partners that can adopt these solutions or sort of to scale this R&D to regions of interest. And one area, again, I'm biased towards weather modification. We're looking, weather mod is sort of an expensive, it requires some CapEx, so you need to have the right aircraft, instrumented aircraft to do cloud seeding. Also equally important is the research and development, so you need to have the right sensors aboard the research aircraft to do that MMRV, which we spoke about. So one area is, of course, drone technology. That's more cost-effective, can be deployed in regions where we don't have that skill, especially when you look at autonomy. So when you bring in both autonomous systems with UAVs, you can deploy these very rapidly, lower cost than that CapEx involved with full scale. So the issue of scale, that's something to look at when we consider developing countries and how we can support sort of innovation in that in those regions as well.
Thank you. All right, Raha.
Okay, I'll bring up something totally different, and that's more of a kind of a call to everyone that's here or joining, is that you don't have to be at COP28. You don't have to be a part of these formal processes to take action and to be part of the solutions for the future. So really, it's for everyone to feel a sense of ownership in the challenges that we face as a commons, not just as one region or one country. Really, it is our global challenge, and to be part of the solution in whatever way that you can. There are, I say this a lot, like really for example, for students, there are almost no jobs of today and the future that will not have an environmental component to them or a climate component to them. So this is really important for everyone to again, kind of get educated, have the awareness, and to be part of the solution.
Good. Well said, all of you. Thank you very much, and thanks to our audience for tuning in, and for the Al-Attiyah Foundation to host us today in this panel discussion. Thank you.